Vietnam 1969 was one of the bloodiest years of combat in the history of American involvement. North Vietnam and the indigenous Communist Party called Viet Cong had almost turned the tide of the war in their favor after the 1968 and 69 Tet Offensive. Almost half of all American casualties lost their lives during those 2 years alone. It was in this setting of intense combat that members of a top-secret Special Forces intelligence gathering operation called Project Gamma were arrested by the Army for the murder of a suspected North Vietnamese double agent. Some historians have claimed that the incident altered the course of the entire war. The soldiers had acted on what they thought were CIA orders, but the government-run agency later denied complicity and left the soldiers to face murder charges alone. This is the inside story, the real story, from our point of view, from members of Detachment 18414 who assisted Project Gamma and worked with the double agent. To set the stage, the war was initially waged by the Viet Cong, a heavily armed South Vietnamese communist-controlled party who largely fought a guerrilla war campaign and sought to impose communism on the South. The North Vietnamese Army engaged in a more conventional war and at times committed large units into battle. China and Russia supplied North Vietnam with money, weapons, and advisors in their quest for control of Asia. Death and destruction in the villages of South Vietnam were hailed as acts of liberation. The stage was set for American involvement, and America's youth would be called upon to sacrifice life and limb to stem the tide of communist aggression on the other side of the world.
Today, the communists reach ruthlessly for domination over Southeast Asia and are trying to break our will to foil the attempt.
The use which the communists make of democracy, and then when they seize power, the effectiveness with which they manage the police apparatus so that dissent cannot arise, and so that the people can no longer express their will, liquidation by gunfire of the opposition or by forcing them out of the country to be refugees. This suggests the kind of problem which we're going to have in this decade. And in my judgment, it's an extremely difficult matter for the free nations to deal with.
We have helped to build, and we have helped to defend. Thus, over many years, we have made a national pledge to help South Vietnam defend its independence, and I intend to keep that promise. I do not find it easy to send the flower of our youth, our finest young men, into battle. I have seen them in 1,000 streets of 100 towns in every state in this union, working and laughing and building and filled with hope and life.
But off they went, with faith in God and country, by the thousands to fight and die in the jungles and rice paddies of Vietnam. The 5th Special Forces Group, better known as Green Berets, were among the first U.S. troops committed to the war, trained and prepared to enrich the hope and pave the way to liberty for the people of South Vietnam. Special Forces A-teams conducted operations in remote areas and hostile environments for extended periods of time with a minimum of external direction and support. Its soldiers are among the most highly decorated in the history of our nation. The Green Berets' original assignment was to advise and train the South Vietnamese Army in its struggle against a hostile aggressor. But as war would have it, the A-teams became the point of the spear, working, living, fighting, and dying with the locals. The Central Intelligence Agency had originally implemented a plan to counteract a strong Viet Cong surge in the central highlands of Vietnam with the creation and establishment of the Civilian Irregular Defense Guard, comprised of civilian soldiers equipped and trained by the Special Forces teams. The CIA and Special Forces were joined at the hip in Vietnam, both working and relying upon each other for better or worse. The war became even more dangerous when North Vietnam compromised the sovereignty of neighboring kingdoms and expanded its reach into Laos and Cambodia by filtering troops and supplies into the region by way of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. The area through which the system meandered was among the most challenging in Southeast Asia, a sparsely populated region of rugged mountains, triple canopy jungle, and dense primeval rainforest. The trail ended in the Seven Mountains range of South Vietnam and left unchecked would eventually help shape the complete isolation of the country. The American government knew they had to take action against the buildup of troops and supplies in Cambodia, but could not order a direct offensive into a neutral country at that time, so they relied on covert missions to accomplish the goal. The primary task fell to special ops teams, one such as Detachment A414 located a stone's throw from enemy-held territory at Ton Tri, Kin Thong Province in the Mekong Delta. The primary mission was surveillance of the border, and Camp A414 served as the home base while the forward observation base sat only meters away from the border itself. Team members were trained in specific military skills and cross-trained in at least one other skill so that he could fill in for other members who are wounded or killed. During the day, the local villagers were peaceful farmers, but at night many of them became the enemy and only a few could be trusted. The enemy came in different shapes and sizes, and only in the cover of darkness would your true enemy ever be revealed. In one such encounter, 7 locals were killed in an attack on the team's forward observation base. The team's area of operation included the infamous Finger, an active VC area of operation nestled between Cambodia on 3 sides. The mission was to keep the area free from Viet Cong activity. Across country, the communists came to fear special forces to such an extent that they resorted to offering bounties to villagers and guerrilla fighters to try and stop them. As tough as it was going to get a lot tougher for the men at Camp A414 in Ton Tri.
The intelligence mission of the Special Forces program in Vietnam was extremely important, gathering intelligence from the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese, especially in bases, hidden bases in Cambodia. These units, these special intelligence units, were given code names using characters in the Greek alphabet, such as Gamma and Delta. The Gamma Project had extremely competent and professional intelligence people assigned to certain A-teams. My A-team, which was A414 in Tan Tri, Vietnam, was in a very important place for these teams to operate. We were near the Cambodian border. These people were sent to the A-teams, but they did not work for me. They were not under my direction. I merely gave them housing, office space, and fed them. Late in 1969, some of the best covert operations were conducted in South Vietnam and gathering intelligence. These units were highly professional and did one of the most outstanding jobs that was done there. These people were assigned to A-teams, but were given the cover of psychological warfare or civil affairs units. They were also given code names and used aliases.
Enter one such young officer, Captain Robert Francis Marasco, alias Robert Martin, a 27-year-old intelligence specialist and former insurance salesman from Bloomfield, New Jersey. He didn't know anything about Vietnam, but when his draft notice arrived in the mail, he volunteered for a 3-year assignment with Army Counterintelligence. In 1968, he further volunteered to serve with the 5th Group. He was assigned to Project Gamma, a CIA-backed operation, and instructed to recruit his own spies in an effort to counter VC activity in Cambodia. He was assigned to Camp A414 in Ton Tri. Marasco's job was espionage. He worked with indigenous agents, and his operation kept tabs on enemy troop buildup and movement within Cambodia to include Parrot's Beak, a fortified VC stronghold. His work played a major role in the eventual invasion of Cambodia in 1970. Until then, cross-border incursions and other offensive, low-visibility, clandestine operations dealt severe blows to NVA and VC activities. Ton Tri team members assisted as needed and on a need-to-know basis. The operation was extremely sensitive and in violation of agreements with Cambodia. Marasco was a spy, out on his own, and he used a fictitious name so that the Army could deny there was anyone in the Army by that name if he was ever captured. Capture would mean a sure death sentence for the courageous young soldier. One of his agents was a South Vietnamese interpreter, 31-year-old Thai Phuc Chuen, recently recruited and placed on payroll by one of Marasco's subordinates. Marasco was disturbed by the lack of information the handler could compile on the new agent and made a conscious decision to move slowly before taking him into complete confidence. Staff Sergeant Alvin Smith, a.k.a. Peter Sands, was a former CIA operative now assigned to Project Gamma under Marasco's command and was stationed in nearby Makwa at the Special Forces B Team 41. Sergeant Smith had recommended and recruited Agent Chuen before a complete background check had been completed. Howbeit, Sergeant Smith was otherwise persuaded of Chuen's loyalty. To his credit, and for reasons now under suspect, Chuen once targeted accurate intel on VC movement in the A-Team's area of operation, resulting in the death of several VC. Sergeant Smith was persuaded of Chuen's loyalty. It was a short-lived persuasion. A reconnaissance team operating in Cambodia soon captured a roll of film showing Chuen meeting with North Vietnamese intelligence officers. At about the same time, local sources of information in Ton Tri had started to dry up. A second intel report originated from Marasco's assistant case manager, aka Sergeant Mike, and confirmed that local agents had identified Chuen as a VC collaborator with contacts in Makwa, and that he had been eliciting information about members of the A-Team and specific combat operations. This led Project Gamma's leadership to conclude that its intelligence agents had been compromised. Chuen was subsequently arrested and interrogated for 10 days. Polygraph tests indicated that he had compromised security and was working with the Viet Cong. Various ways of dealing with Chuen were discussed. If he was turned over to the South Vietnamese Army, there was the chance he might go free due to the actions of another communist plant. Two of the Green Berets met with CIA headquarters in Saigon. The CIA did not want him. Now the Green Berets faced a real dilemma, professionally and morally, but they could not ignore Chuen's dangerous liability. A decision was made based on the CIA directive. On 20 June 1969, Marasco and two officers assigned to Project Gamma drugged and loaded Chuen into a borrowed boat and terminated him with one painless shot to the head, and then tossed his weighted body down into the murky waters. A cover story claiming that Chuen had been sent on what could be a one-way mission as a test of his loyalty was later approved by the group's commander, Colonel Robert Rowe. Sergeant Smith was upset and grew concerned for his own safety. He sought sanctuary with the CIA in Saigon, where he revealed that Chuen had been killed. Colonel Rowe, Captain Marasco, and others involved in the conspiracy were arrested, and the CIA denied knowledge of the assassination. The case was covered extensively by the media and led to popular knowledge of the term terminate with extreme prejudice. Army defense lawyers for the soldiers called military and CIA officials to testify. Both declined to get involved in the proceedings. Finally, in September 1969, Secretary of the Army Stanley Reeser announced that all charges would be dropped against the 8 soldiers since the CIA, in the interest of national security, had refused to make its personnel available as witnesses, therefore making any manner of a fair trial impossible. Serious questions remained unanswered. What had been the most productive intelligence operation in all of South Vietnam was now what many considered a black eye for special forces. Some claimed that it damaged the war effort by fueling anti-war sentiments stateside. It served as the catalyst for Daniel Ellsberg's release of the Pentagon Papers. To others, it appeared that career officers were made the scapegoat to avoid CIA accountability. Was frontier justice without due process fair game for a double agent? Or did the Green Berets emulate the style of a mafia-type organization? It became a battle of words, of politics, and of debate. Did the CIA abandon the soldiers? And how would that translate to future operatives under orders from the CIA? And how should the rules of engagement be defined? Was Chu Yen guilty or innocent? Who would now define guilty? The story is not complete until hearing from members of the A-Team who lived and worked with Chu Yen and others who share their personal insights as to the rest of the story.
I came to Tan Tree in April, March or April of 1969. And when I got there, I had my normal 12-man team, along with a 13th person who, at that time, we had a civil affairs officer assigned to us. But much to my surprise, when I got there, I found that I had 2 civil affairs officers. A little unusual, but then I was pulled to one side and was told that this second civil affairs officer and his interpreter and his sergeant was in fact a cross-border operation which was going on, going from Republic of Vietnam into Cambodia.
My duty assignment to Tan Tree was Commo Chief. That means that I coded and decoded situation reports on a daily basis, and I was sometimes summoned to assist Captain Marasco's case manager in the sending of intelligence reports when Captain Marasco and his radio operator were off-site for one reason or other. Otherwise, I spent a lot of time at the forward observation base running ambush patrols along the Cambodian border, and this is where I first met Agent Chu Yen. We had a high casualty rate among our translators, and Agent Chu Yen was loaned out to us by Sergeant Smith for a few days at a time. He was a very pleasant man, generally fun to be around, certainly nothing abnormal about him, and certainly no reason to suspect that he was a double agent or even triple agent at that time.
When Marasco discovered that Chu Yen was not what he purported himself to be, he came to me to ask advice. He came to me because I was older and I had been in combat before. He asked what should he do. He said, "I think I have a double on my hands." I said, "Sir, if I were you, I would take him into Makwa to the CIA base chief. They have more assets than we do and they're more skilled in that type activity." Marasco turned to me and he said, "No, I'll handle it on my own."
Whether by design or change of mind, Marasco did indeed turn to the CIA for instructions on how to handle the situation. The CIA chief in Saigon met with the operatives and, according to the Green Berets, sanctioned the execution of Tai Phuoc Chu Yen. They returned to the B team in Makwa and finalized plans for the execution. After Mike confirmed that Agent Chu Yen had been positively identified as a double agent, I inquired as to how it would be handled. He said that Chu Yen would likely be summoned for a fake mission and arrested and then processed from there. We've later learned that Agent Chu Yen told his wife and his brother that he was being summoned for interrogation because he had refused to participate in a Special Forces covert mission. Now, that was not the truth, so evidently they were not aware of all the things that he was involved in. He was actually summoned on the pretense of preparing to go out on a Special Forces mission, and he saw that as an opportunity to embed himself deeper into the intelligence community, and of course that backfired on him.
Sergeant Smith, my husband, was shocked to identify Chu Yen in the photograph. Still, he believed he could convert Chu Yen to work for his side. Chu Yen failed every polygraph exam without ever admitting to being a double agent. Before this, Peter had targeted Chu Yen on the VC operating in the Makwa area. The VC were launching nightly attacks and killing a lot of civilians.
Not unlike other cities in South Vietnam as depicted here, the city of Makwa suffered horribly at the hand of Viet Cong aggression on a regular basis. Makwa hosted the Special Forces B-Team 41, and the camp collected a few direct hits while the city and innocent civilians bore the brunt of terrorist attacks for 52 miles of the road. The VC utilized the hit-and-run strategy, moving their position each night before spotters could locate them and thereby evaded detection. The human toll and carnage was intentional and relentless. As always, the innocent suffered. The task of cleaning the bodies of loved ones and friends fell to those who survived. Scenes of death and mourning were seen throughout the city. Pain, suffering, and agonizing loss was felt by those whose lives were touched by the senseless deaths. These are the results of indiscriminate attacks on residential areas. Intel reports indicated that the attacks were originating from the area of operation in Tan Tri, and a seething anger quickly arose in the members of Detachment A414, who wanted nothing more than a chance to eliminate the vicious enemy responsible for the atrocities. The final straw came one night when a young mother and her baby were killed during an attack. By this time, Sergeant Smith had recruited Chuan as his personal agent, and although he was not supposed to effect any collection operations within Vietnam without Marasco's approval, he targeted Chuan on the VC activity. He did not think this house-cleaning chore would be out of line.
Chuan's mission was to identify when and from what area the Viet Cong would launch their next attack. If the attack were closer to Tan Tri, Marasco and some of the Green Berets from his team would ambush them. If it were closer to Makwa, Peter and the B team would take them. As it turned out, shortly after receiving his target, Chuan provided the time and coordinates of the next attack. It was closer to Tan Tri and at the time and place Chuan had specified. Marasco's team killed him to a man as a result of Chuan's intel report.
Regarding that ambush that Sergeant Smith alluded to in his memoirs, I was the patrol leader that evening. Agent Chuan, myself, and 10 indigenous troops had set up the ambush perimeter in anticipation of enemy troop movement through that sector. And true enough, that evening when I was peering through the starlight scope, which enabled me to see more clearly through the darkness, I saw enemy troop movement, and we opened fire on them. They did not return fire. I peered through the scope again and saw some of them escaping back towards the tree line from which they had come. I handed the scope off to Agent Chuan. He peered through it and smiled. I thought that was rather strange. It did strike me at the moment, but then again, it was not a big thing to be thinking about. I reached for the mic to the PRC-25 that was the radio that was backpacked by one of the troops, and tried to call back into the FOB for mortar support, wanting them to drop rounds into the tree line where the enemy was fleeing. But all I could get on the radio was dead air, no response whatsoever. So at that point, all I knew the enemy was escaping, and that seemed unacceptable at that moment. So I made a spontaneous decision to pursue them, and we did that. When we approached the tree line they had disappeared into, we lined up parallel to each other and made our way towards it, emptying our weapons into the tree line. Agent Chuan was to my left, the other troops were to my right. I noticed that Agent Chuan was not firing his M16, but he was fiddling with it as though something was wrong. We still did not take any return fire, so we stopped short of going into the tree line. As I pondered our next move, Charlie, the Viet Cong, made the decision for me, because they opened up on us from within the tree line and started lobbing some mortars in our direction as well. So being outnumbered by a superior force and no support that we knew about, we had to escape and evade to a safer location, which we did, and set up a new perimeter. Now back at the FOB, the specialists on duty that evening could see the tracers lighting up the sky and of course the mortar explosions. And so he was trying to call me on the radio to no avail. Thinking the worst, that I was either killed or perhaps seriously wounded, he made a command decision to try to save me and the troops. And he started lobbing mortar rounds at the last known coordinates I had given him when we first set up the ambush, and that was at the tree line. Now, from our position, we could see the flash of the mortar being fired, and we could also see the explosion striking the tree line. And he did a really good job with that. He was right on target, and he splintered that tree line to pieces. We spent the rest of the evening in safety. We made our way back to the FOB the next morning, where we discovered that the frequency dial on the radio had been switched to a different frequency. And that explained why we could not contact each other. We didn't understand how that could have happened, but we realized that sometimes things just happen. I did question Agent Chuyen about his M16. He said that it jammed. It was a very plausible explanation. The M16 has been known to jam at times, and so there was no reason to doubt that he was telling the truth. And again, there was no reason to doubt or to believe that Agent Chuyen was a double agent.
Peter Smith came to believe that Chuyen was a double agent, but he never fully came to terms with the assassination. He had a close relationship with Chuyen, and there was a mutual trust between them. Still, he realized the seriousness of the situation, and he arranged to bring Chuyen in for interrogation.
My name is Robert Bidwell, retired Special Forces Colonel, U.S. Army. At the time of the incident in question, I was Operations Officer S3 of Detachment B41 of the Company C 5th Special Forces Group. At the time the incident occurred, I was not on site. I was on extension leave in the United States. But prior to my departure, I had caught the interpreter for the S5 section under Sergeant Sands in my TOC, unaccompanied, looking through documents and looking at the maps. I caught him there one time. I told him to leave, and I told him that if I caught him in there again, he would suffer some bodily harm. He left, indignant. I was prompted from that to inform Sergeant Sands and my commander, Lieutenant Colonel Herline, that I personally found this interpreter to be suspect, and that I wasn't sure that it was a good thing to have him in the detachment unaccompanied. When I returned from extension leave, all of this had happened. This is the first time I have been asked to make a statement about anything concerning the incident, and that's really all I can offer.
Should anyone still think that Agent Chuyen might be innocent of the charges levied against him, let's think it through here. If I was an astute double agent, like I think that he was, I would want to handle my handler instead of letting my handler handle me. And I think that's the case we have here. Up until this ambush incident, all the intelligence information that Agent Chuyen had given Sergeant Smith was frivolous at its best. It was always after the enemy had passed through. He never provided intel that would put our troops in a position to intercept and eliminate the enemy. Now, we need to remember that Agent Chuyen worked for 3 different countries, or at least it appears so. He worked for the United States, he worked for North Vietnam, and he worked for the South Vietnamese government. I do not believe that he was loyal to any particular nation or political philosophy. He was on payroll, and I believe it was about the money. Now, living in this world of deceit and espionage, he has to be a man who is willing to take risk. And I believe that's what he did. By making the decision to betray this enemy troop movement so that he would be able to embed himself deeper into Sergeant Smith's trust and into Special Forces intelligence operations. And the evening of that ambush, when we made contact with the enemy, it would be an easy thing for him to have, in the dark of night, reached up to the back of the soldier packing the radio and changed that frequency dial to a different freak. I also believe that when he actually peered through the starlight scope and saw the Viet Cong retreating into the tree line, he smiled because that's what he wanted to have happen. And at that moment, he felt like things were going down the way he wanted them to go down. He had provided accurate intelligence. There would be minimum contact. Now, what he could not count on, of course, was the decision to pursue the enemy. And so, being a man of risk, he had to roll with us on that one. Still, he refused to fire into the tree line as we approached it. But I do believe that we have enough evidence outside of this incident to enforce my theory that he had planned to betray the Viet Cong during this ambush for those very purposes. And that, of course, is the major incident that persuaded Sergeant Smith of Chu Yen's allegiance to the United States and inspired Sergeant Smith to recommend registering him as an official agent for Special Forces.
It didn't take long for the affair to take a turn of events, and the Green Berets no longer had control of it. When Pete Smith learned that 3 of the assassins made a dry run similar to the scenario that ended Chu Yen's life, he suspected they were plotting to kill him next. Marasco was the only one of the group that Peter trusted, and Marasco had gone back to Tan Tree. Consequently, Peter was totally isolated with his suspicions. This led him to go to CIA headquarters in Saigon to report the facts of the case. However, he never intended for it to go publicly. He wrote that he thought it would be handled internally, and it was further complicated, however, when Colonel Rowe presented Creighton Abrams with the cover story. Creighton Abrams was commander of all U.S. Armed Forces in Vietnam and was known for his very strong opinions. He rushed to shut the Green Berets down immediately after hearing Colonel Rowe's story of Chu Yen's disappearance. Colonel Rowe, my husband, Marasco, and 4 other Green Berets were arrested on premeditated murder and placed in solitary confinement at Long Binh Jail, infamously known as LBJ. Later, the Army declared Sergeant Smith immune from charges in the pending trial, but he wrote that he planned to go to prison rather than testify against the other men, and I'm sure he would have.
We wanted this trial, and we were moving forward, and we would take it right up to Nixon, and we would force his hand, and either he would let the CIA open up their files to us insofar as this case was concerned, and as far as the context of this case was concerned, or he wasn't going to get his trial. And whether it was General Abrams, Melvin Laird, Richard Nixon, but somebody decided that it just wasn't worth it. I know that Abrams had never much liked the concept of special forces, but somebody decided very high up, I suspect at the top, that it just wasn't worth it. And they figured out that we were serious. And they figured out that they could court-martial me and take my commission away, and I'd still file writs from whatever pen they put me in. We were not going to let up. Somebody had to back down. And the pressure got to be very great. Some congressmen stood up in Congress and raised 17 kinds of hell. They thought they were going to get away with good old boying these people into the pen, and it wasn't going to happen. And the president realized that, and so did everybody around him. And they knew that rather than to have me and people like me, Marty Linsky, Bill Hart, the others, rather than have us get our hands on the documents we were requesting from the CIA, well, as I said on television, they can have their war or they can have their trial. They get their choice. Anyway, we did what we did. You know, you get to gunsling for justice every now and then, and that's what we did.
Things happen that we didn't want to happen, but we're not always in control of everything that happens. The Soviet Union were behind the North Vietnamese and behind the Viet Cong. They falsely claimed, for instance, that we were killers. Special Forces people were killers who killed women and children, that we were degenerates. Nothing could be further from the truth. I can tell you none of my people ever killed a woman or a child. The soldier does the best he can under the conditions in which he's placed.
Living and working on a team infiltrated by a double agent proved hazardous to team members as well as local intel agents who refused to continue spying for as long as Chuyen was on site and on the loose. It is believed that Lieutenant Willie Williams and Sergeant First Class Frank Midlow were intended victims of Chuyen's ongoing espionage activities with the aid of a treacherous CID soldier.
The incident at hand, this ambush, was it's related because we thought that we were led into this ambush by someone with foreknowledge of our strength, our movements, who was involved, who was out there, how many of us, what. I mean, they knew what they were doing. It was very well planned. All hell broke loose. Machine guns from the left, machine guns from the right, machine guns from the front, RPG rockets or some kind of rocket coming at us. It was just, I've never seen anything like it. And I got off one magazine to the left side and hit the dirt, and nobody had any thoughts of charging the ambush. We just, it was suicide. So we started just hugging the dirt and started as best we could moving backwards towards our rear. And of course we were thinking, well, we might get shot by our own troops because they could mistake us for the BC, and it was almost dark. It was dusk when this started. It lasted for 55 minutes, as I remember, and a forward air observer, a little fixed wing out of Muckwa, got over the site. We did have radio contact for a few minutes before our handset was shot off, and we lost contact. And we started zigzagging, evading to the rear, and Sergeant Frank Midlow, the other American that was with me, we had about 100 Vietnamese and 2 Americans. Sergeant Midlow was dropping 60 mortar fire on the U-shaped ambush as best he could, and trying to cover for us. And it was so well executed that these BC knew our names. They were calling out our names. They came through the killing zone there, kill zone. It was dark by then, and they were using whistles to signal each other. When the other helicopters, the tactical air support, finally came overhead, they ambushed them. It was all planned. And the man that led us into this tree line disappeared. We never saw him again. So that's why we figured he was assigned to lead us into that U-shaped ambush, textbook U-shaped ambush. And I finally made contact to the rear. Sergeant Midlow was wounded in the leg. I believe he was medevaced before I even got to the rear. It was about midnight. By then, I'd been missing in action, reportedly, for 6 hours, and my radio carrier and I made it back. The others just went in their own direction. Some of them made it, some of them did.
We heard a lot of gunfire off to the east, and mortar fire and gunfire and all that. And a little while later, a couple of stragglers from a patrol that we'd sent out about 2 days prior came running in, saying there'd been a big ambush out there and many people were dead. And by that time, we'd been getting some traffic over the radio that indicated some of the same thing. I alerted our headquarters in Muckwa that we had a big contact going on, and they requested some assistance. And they got some helicopters and brought them on up to our camp, and myself, another American, couple of the Vietnamese Special Forces advisors, and a recon platoon from our CIDG unit went on as a reaction force to relieve the ambush. By that time, I'd made some contact by radio with one of our Americans out there, Sergeant Frank Midland. When we got on the ground, we found that Frank Midland and his Special Forces counterpart had withdrawn from the ambush site, and by this time the ambush was pretty well was over with. There was no firing going on or anything, and by this time Frank and the Special Forces counterpart had got the CIDG back into a perimeter. We landed there, and one of the first things that I said was, "Hey Frank, you're wounded?" And he said, "Yeah, but it's not too bad." And he says, and I said, "Well, where's Lieutenant Williams?" And he said, "I don't know." He says, "You know, he's out there someplace, I think, but I don't know where he is." So we lost track of each other. And I said, "Oh, he's either out there dead someplace, or wounded, or he's been captured." You know, none of those were a good scenario. Got Frank on and a couple of other the CIDG that were wounded on one of the helicopters and sent them back to camp. And then myself and one other American, whose name I forgot, and our Vietnamese counterparts reorganized the CIDG that was on the ground along with our recon platoon and spread out in a line of scrimmages and headed back into the ambush site. And as we moved into the ambush site, we started picking up gear. Mostly of it was our gear, and picked up some of our weapons that had been discarded by our soldiers in their haste to retreat. And then either 6 or 7 of our dead CIDG. And of course, every time I saw a body, I said, "That's Lieutenant Williams," but it wasn't. And we never did find Lieutenant Williams. By this time, it was real dark, and we had a C-130 gunship overhead providing cover, and it was also providing flare support. So the only, you know, it was dark, and the only the light we had was the flares going off. Set ourselves up a perimeter for the night because our helicopter support had left us, and they wouldn't be able to return until the following morning. Set ourselves up a perimeter for the night, and just hope for the best. And you know. And I do remember that right near where I set myself up was a pile of bodies. And then about 3 o'clock in the morning, there was a commotion on the line, and the word came back that somebody was coming through the line. You know, first thing that you worry about is about to get ambushed again. But coming through the line was Lieutenant Williams. But it was a miracle that he was still alive. You know, when daylight came and the helicopters came back, he was one of the first that I put back on the helicopter.
It was just 2 months later that Daniel Ellsberg, a U.S. military analyst employed by the Rand Corporation, released the Pentagon Papers. The papers were a top-secret study regarding the conduct of the Vietnam War. Ellsberg was one of the few individuals who had access to these papers, which showed the United States had no realistic chance of achieving victory in Vietnam. It was Ellsberg's decision to release the papers because he became disillusioned with the war, and it is thought that the inept handling of the Green Beret case inspired Ellsberg to take this action.
Whether the Green Beret Affair helped alter the course of the war or not can still be debated, but it did become a lightning rod for pro- and anti-war demonstrators. The anti-war sentiment was at a high peak of resistance, which is, ironically, a right secured by the soldier. The soldiers did receive thousands of letters and best wishes from those who understood that war is bigger than the individual and that the people of Vietnam were worth fighting for, howbeit mishandled and misunderstood by the civil authorities who authorized it. Yet, the question remains and begs to be answered. Was it the right thing to do? Did the Green Berets commit a crime? Was the execution of one double agent wrong if it saved the lives of Americans and innocent civilians?
Look, what I could do with is more compassion and more sympathy with those tens of thousands of civilians in South Vietnam who have been killed and kidnapped by the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese forces as a matter of deliberate policy, and the far larger tens of thousands of South Vietnamese military who've been killed and wounded simply because North Vietnam is trying to seize South Vietnam by force.
The larger question of American involvement in the war at all divided the country. Some said that America's honor was not worth the lives of American soldiers. Others said that it wasn't about honor, rather life and liberty, defense of others against tyranny in pursuit of freedom.
All of us tend to place a greater value on our own people. But can you really draw a line as to whether it's worth one American life if that by saving that American life you subject probably thousands of Vietnamese to death? Human life is human life.
Do you feel that what you've gone through and what you're going to have to go through the rest of your life was worthwhile?
Yes, I do. Because I think just about all people should think of just one thing right now, and that's freedom. And the only way we're going to get freedom is to protect ourselves, whether it's in this country or in other countries that need our help. And I think a lot of people feel the same way as I do.
As far as right or wrong, I just have to go back to ground zero where I lived as a soldier. From my perspective, my duty assignment was to protect innocent people against hostile aggressors and tyranny. Anything else that happened was incidental towards that ultimate goal. About Chu En, perhaps it should have been handled differently, maybe could have been handled better. But I was not involved in any of those decisions, and I certainly cannot second guess those fine officers who had to make that decision. I know that it was difficult for them to do, and none of them wanted to do it. But I do have to ask the question, did Robert Marasco do anything worse than any ordinary soldier on an ambush patrol? Both are eliminating a dangerous enemy. And someone more wise than I will have to figure that out.
Every combat soldier faces life or death, difficult decisions every day. And we had our fair share of those decisions to make. We didn't always get it right, but we got the job done.
The people here is fighting for freedom. Every coolie here is a hero. Every coolie, every Vietnamese should get a medal, and every American who works so fights here is a hero. You will realize when it's too late.
It is customary to conclude a speech from the White House by asking support for the President of the United States. Tonight, I depart from that President. What I ask is far more important. I ask for your support for our brave men fighting tonight halfway around the world, not for territory, not for glory, but so that their younger brothers and their sons and your sons can have a chance to grow up in a world of peace and freedom and justice. Thank you and good night.
This country and what it stands for, liberty and freedom for everyone. I'm proud to be an American living in this great land, and I'm telling you right now, no matter what, no matter how, will be free any way that I can. across the nation under a star-spangled sky. People bound for glory, singing live free or die. They're proud to be Americans living in this great land, and I am telling you right now,